this video, you and I are going to take a raw file shot well over 10 years ago and do a completely new edit from this craptastic overprocessed look to this final HDR image right inside of Lightroom. Let's get into it. My name is Pi, and I'm one of the founders of Lynn and Jersa Photography and SLRLounge.com. We're teaming up with Adorama to bring you a new series of photography tutorials called Master Your Craft right here on Adorama TV. So let's dive in. Hello, my friends. My name is Pi. Welcome to Adorama TV and welcome to my new home studio. Let's get straight into this. I think it's always fun to kind of look at where you were and how far you've come when it comes to photography. And specifically for this video, we're talking editing. My editing skill set has transformed dramatically since I got into photography, and this specific image we'll be working on was shot back in 2009. I don't even know what that is. What is that, like 12, 13 years ago? It's wild to think that I've been taking pictures this long. This is one of the very first weddings that I shot, and early on it was one of my favorite images as well. Now, because I don't exactly have my client's permission, I'm going to give you guys the exercise file, but I'll give you the file for this particular image where they're kind of blurred out. So if you want, you can pause the video and download the exercise file so we can work through it together. Now, this is what my old editing style looked like. So here's the raw file, and take a look at these. I mean, these things, I don't know what we're looking at. We got to see this. Here's the raw. This is one of those cases, you know, the interwebs are always like, I think I like the raw better. I would agree with you in this instance. Back then, my style was, our studio style was very, I'm going to say, overcooked. We were kind of going for this old school HDR vibe. We had a lot of contrast. I would say, well, at least I kept the blacks and whites. No, I didn't. I crushed them all. The blacks are completely crushed. We've got nuclear skin tones, probably because I was watching a lot of Transformers movies and I'm like, you know what? I gotta do nuclear skin tones. But this thing is wild. So we're gonna take it and actually process from the ground up. I'm gonna give you some tips and tricks along the way. Let's get right into this. So you should have the image loaded up at this point. And this was shot actually, just because it's fun to go back and look and see. This was on a 5D Mark II on the 2470 f2.8. So that's the original 2470. I hated that lens, but it was kind of a go-to lens when it comes to wedding photography. 1/500 of a second, f2.8 and ISO 50. I'm gonna go full screen by pressing Shift F. And throughout this video, I'm gonna give you guys not only a lot of tips, but I'm also gonna give you some shortcuts and hotkeys on kind of navigating and working through Lightroom. So make sure you remember them. And if you enjoy this style of education, check out our Lightroom Masterclass on f-stoppers. It is now available and it's freaking awesome. Let's go from the ground up on this. What I'm going to start first is I always want to start my image editing with the largest adjustments first and then kind of work from there, okay? So what I'm going to do is actually go to my base tones. And for this image, I'd say the white balance is pretty close, but we'll get it more dialed in once we get a few settings in there. What I'm going to do first is actually preserve all of my highlights and most of my whites, and I'm going to raise the shadows and the blacks as well. I talked about in this edit, I want to go for sort of a modern HDR portrait kind of vibe. And by the way, when we get to the end of this, you can save this all out as a preset. It's going to work really nicely for all your images when you're going for this kind of a look. The first thing you might notice is when I do this, if I press J, you'll notice that this turns on the highlight and clipping alert. And we'll see that basically by pulling the highlights down, by bringing the blacks up, we're preserving detail, but we're also flattening out the image, meaning it's losing contrast. The first thing that I'm going to do to compensate for this is to go down to the tone curve. I'm going to pull up from the highlights and I'm going to pull down from the shadows. This is going to add the contrast back to my image. And so I'll often do this two-step process where I'm combining base tones with the tone curve to get to kind of the detail that I want to have in an image. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to go over this bottom point and I'm going to pull it up to around 5. What this does is it creates a subtle matte finish on the blacks. So basically the black point is going to go gray as soon as it drops below this point right here. I'm going to set it to 5 so it's not too gray. And I'm going to do the same thing in the highlights, only I'm going to pull the highlights down to 240, maybe 245-ish. This means that anything that's brighter than this level goes to a bright gray. So this kind of tones down a little bit of the contrast in the image, which is nice because I'm adding quite a bit of contrast with this HDR effect. I'm going to add another point in the center. And by the way, when you're editing the tone curve, remember that you have all of these different curves available, and each of these is actually an independent curve. So this is the point curve. I don't want you to try to make this adjustment in the parametric curve, which is oftentimes the mistake that we make. This is for broad kind of categorical adjustments across these different ranges. This is where we're specifically dialing in a curve. So I'm pulling up on the midtones, which is going to brighten my midtone highlights. I'm going to bring the let's see, the actual highlights. I do want some contrast there, so I'm going to leave it around 220-ish. And if you want to constrain movement on this axis, so like I'm only moving up and down, just hold down Shift when you click on a point, and now it's going to move up and down just along the y-axis, so it's not going to move left and right. Okay, I like this right about here. What this is a subtle S-curve. Well, not really that subtle, but it's a contrast boosting curve. So S-curves boost contrast, and that's exactly what we're getting out of it. Notice that I'm saving contrast for last because that's one of my fine-tuning adjustments that I like to make. I don't like to use contrast to actually design a look. I want to keep exposure, contrast, all of those kind of zeroed out so I can save a look and then apply it to another image and have those as my fine-tuning options where possible. From here, I'm going to go to clarity. I'm going to boost clarity up a bit. I don't want to go crazy. Up here is like the nasty HDR. We don't want to go that high. I did a lot of that kind of stuff back then. I'm going to go ahead and do dehaze. By the way, do you notice that I shot this Dutch angle, so it's on a tilt? And this is one of the few images that I actually felt like Dutch angle actually works here because you don't see the horizon. It's kind of in the moment and it works. But Dutch angle is sort of the first composition that I feel like we photographers learn and are like, that's creative. Every image I shoot is going to be tilted. And then we get a whole catalog of images where the world is falling over. Okay, so from here, with this dialed in, I'm going to go now to temperature and I'm going to start warming it up a bit. My style is still on the warm side. I wouldn't say it's like, you know, this was Transformers warm over here. It's not Transformers warm, but it is a little bit more warm than maybe some people. So just dial in the white balance that you like and prefer for your images. From here, I'm going to start fine tuning. I can bring the blacks up a bit. I can bring the shadows a bit to kind of reveal more detail. And I'm going to start playing with the white point as well as the highlights. Notice that I'm pulling the highlights down, but I'm leaving the whites a little bit brighter. I'm pulling the shadows up and I'm pulling the blacks up as well, but I'm also adding a lot of blacks down here too. What I like to do is make sure that I'm preserving contrast in my images, especially when I go for these HDR looks. So just be careful you don't kind of pull whites all the way down because then you kind of kill that contrast. I think we're doing it pretty solid. What I'm going to do now is this. Let's go to HSL. We're going to keep working adjustment by adjustment, okay? The first thing I'm going to do is let's start working with the actual color palette. I'd like to sort of pull the color palette together a little bit, meaning what I'm going to do is actually bring the oranges a little bit more toward the green side. I'm also going to bring the blues a little bit more towards the green side. Not a lot, just a little bit to kind of give the image a little bit more of a unified color palette. So we're just taking it a little bit towards those directions. With the actual greens, I'm going to pull them more towards the teal side. And this is starting to look pretty nice. We got the oranges up a little bit. I might bring the yellows also towards the green side a little bit. You can go however you like, but what I'm thinking of is if I want to go for that cinematic, I think I was going for Transformers vibe. This would be like an orange teal color palette where we're going to see some oranges, but also some greens and hues. So in the highlights, we see a lot of warmer colors, the oranges, the yellows. And in the shadows, we see more teals, the greens, the blues, that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what I'm going to emulate since I was sort of going for that vibe 10 years ago, just in a very not so good way. I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I still don't know what I'm doing. We're all a work in progress. You should be better tomorrow than you were today. What I'm going to do now is in saturation, I'm going to the, just notice I'm grabbing the eyedropper again. I'm pulling down a little bit on the blues. I don't like my colors oversaturated these days. And so I'm going to pull down a bit on the blues, a little bit on the oranges, and even down on the greens, quite dramatically actually on the greens. I'm going to take the greens down to like -35. Why do you hate greens? I don't hate greens. I just feel like we could do with a little bit less. Okay, go up to temperature. I'm going to warm it up a little bit. right about here. And we're starting to get to a really nice place in terms of the overall look and vibe. And if you feel like you want more saturation, if you want to bring the blues back a bit towards the blue side, or if you want to go with a different color palette, you totally can. What I'm going to do is go down to color grading, and I'm going to add to the color palette. We're going to go to the highlights first. I find it easier, by the way, when you're designing a look, design from this side as opposed to the trifecta, the three-way view. From here, I'm going to pull a little bit of oranges in. Okay, now notice I'm going to bring the hue to like around 50. That's about orange, but I'm going to take the saturation way down. I'm also going to bring the, so luminance is going to control like the brightness of these tones. I'm going to bring the luminance up a little, and I'm going to blend this more towards the highlights. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the midtones. This is where I'm going to start putting in a little bit more richness. So I'm going to start building in a little bit of those greens now. And we're going to go to like 80. Again, I'm going to keep this very subtle. I don't want the lumens to kind of change in the midtones. Then I'm going to go to the shadows. I'm going to start building in a little bit more of the teals. We're going to go 165. We're going to go 5 for saturation. Well, let's see if we like 10. Oh, I messed up my hue. Let's go. There we go. 10. I like 5 better. And I'm going to go ahead and I don't think I want to raise my luminance. I'm actually going to drop it just a little bit. And I'm still going to keep the blending more towards the highlight side. This is over all of those tones. So this little interface down here on the blending side, it's how much of the blend you want from the highlights, the shadows, and the midtones. And on the midtones, I think I want to go a little bit back towards the oranges a little bit more. So maybe around 60-ish. But I'm building 3 different tones into this, and it kind of adds a little bit of richness and depth to the color. This is something that I talk a lot about in terms of like color grading and coming with looks within our full course, like the Lightroom Masterclass. But look at the subtle, it's a subtle, but it's like this, it's this beautiful unifying of all the colors that adds a nice bit of polish to it. For sharpening, we don't need to go as crunchy as I did before. That was super crunchy. What we're going to do is take the sharpening up. And check this out. I'm going to take it up pretty high. Let's click on masking, holding down Alter option, drag to the right. And what you can do is you can make it so your sharpening is only applying to the thickest lines in the image. So right around 85, I'm only sharpening like significant detail. And now I'm going to take the radius up. I can even take the sharpening effect up, and I'm not going to be sharpening pores on the skin. Okay, so I like that right there. If you want noise reduction just for a little bit of skin softening, you totally can. Sometimes I'll build it in at like 10 or 15 to like an HDR look, just because we do introduce a little bit of grain when we do sort of HDR type styles, when we're lifting a lot of the shadows and the blacks. From here, I have these settings over here. This is in Visual Flow's retouching toolkit. And all it is, you'll notice, is just a different post-crop setting. But I've saved these out as presets because I use them to sort of, well, I use them as like a quick and dirty radial filter to draw attention in. So you can just save out the setting if you want, or you can actually look at all 3 of these. What I'm going to do is do a radial vignette, or this post-crop vignette plus, and then I'm actually going to drop in a radial burn as well. Shift M to grab a radial filter. Go ahead and click out from the center of their faces. And I'm just going to enhance that, that burn a little bit, but don't do it this way where it's inverted. So actually invert this so it's brightening towards the center of them. And now I can kind of control the outside of the frame a little bit more. From here, this is where I'm going to brighten up a little. And I could choose to maybe back off that vignette a little bit. Actually, I kind of dig the vignette. I think it gets dark a little bit on the bottom. So what I might do is this. Yeah, I kind of like it. But I do feel like the sky needs to be adjusted a little bit. I say a little bit a lot. I'm going to pull that radial filter up a little bit in the in the exposure, and I'm going to save my contrast for very last. So what is it missing now? When I look at the image now, I'm just missing a little bit of extra kick in the clouds. I'm going to give you guys a brush, and this is from Visual Flow's retouching toolkit. You guys can just save out these settings. It's a toolkit with all these quick enhancements and retouching brushes dialed in. And just pause and dial in these settings. This is going to basically just enhance your sky. So what I'm going to do is paint over the entire sky. Notice that I am not using the auto mask. The auto mask tool can kind of create weird effects on this kind of stuff. So keep the auto mask off, and I'm painting around. I'm gonna lower the temperature a little bit, and I'm gonna raise the pinks a little bit in the sky. So I get a little bit more pinks coming through in the sky. I can even add a little bit more contrast. I can even add a little bit more clarity if I want to, but I think this is looking like pretty nice. I might even take actually dehaze up a little bit. Why not? Why not, I ask? Okay, bringing the exposure up a little. Let's dial in a final exposure, final contrast. And I'm really loving the way that this looks now. And let's just, why don't we take a look at the 2009 edit versus present. Okay, we'll compare. I'm definitely gonna say the one on the left is a little better. We preserved our detail. We got a really cool HDR effect. What I might do, looking at the other image, sometimes it's helpful to actually look at an image raw or to look at a previous editing style to see what else you want to do to it. I might actually take the contrast up a little bit more and maybe do a tiny bit more dehaze as well and back off the radial vignette just a little bit. So that little post-crop vignette is not too strong. And from here, who knows, maybe kick a little bit more. Maybe kick a little more of that transformer warmth into there. I'm liking that. Okay. Now, once you have this set, you can actually just go to your develop module and click plus, create preset. And I'll give you my settings. What I do is I select check all, and then I deselect white balance and exposure because you should be adjusting those on an image to image basis. And then I'll deselect anything like, well, any type of masking, anything that you want on a per image basis, like cropping, that kind of stuff, I'll deselect, and then I'll save this out as a preset. So you can do that, and then you can apply it to your image, which is actually this one. So let's do it and see what we get to. I love this. Okay, I'm gonna tone down the brightness a little bit, and look at this. What I might do in this image, because this image is really about the detail of the car and kind of the implied story in the background, is I'm actually going to move the radial burn over to the front of the car. So I'm just going into my mask and I'm moving that right over there. The other thing I'm going to do is one more little adjustment. I have a brush that you guys can again save out. This is a detail enhancement that I use for clothing. So again, details in clothing, these are the settings, and I'm going to just brush this right over the horse. And look at it just kind of like lift out that iconic Mustang. I love Mustangs. And honestly, I think the coolest part of the Mustang is the freaking horse. I do like the car though. It's a really cool classic car. Okay. Isn't that wicked? Like, look at how vibey that is. I'm going to turn down the brightness a little bit more on this one, maybe even cool down the image a little bit since they're kind of in the background. And I love it. Look at our final styles. So this was, let's take a look at these side by side, and let's look at the overcooked, overprocessed versions of them too. I think we've come a long way. I think we've definitely improved in terms of our editing skills. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I hope that some of these tips in terms of, how you get to good HDR looking images today were helpful. And you can, again, apply different colors, different looks, but take the techniques and apply it and make it your own. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, you know what to do. I love reading your guys' comments, seeing what you all think. If you have questions, let me know. I get lots of ideas from them. And you can help me out by, well, telling YouTube and Adorama that I'm doing a good job by actually liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and well, tuning in next week, because I'll see you guys back here, same time at same place next week. Peace.